Again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Virginia Net Metering webinar uh, facilitated by Solar United Neighbors. This afternoon, we'll be talking about Appalachian Power Company's or APCo's net metering rate proposal, looking at some issues and problems with that proposal and ways that you and others can take action before the upcoming SEC hearing. And so I'm going to kick us off giving some introductions and a little brief intro about net metering and Sun's work as it relates to our theory of change. And then I'm going to turn it over to Liz. All right, Liz, next slide. So as you come in, please choose your audio for this. Please submit questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A period towards the end of this. So if you have any questions, please submit those in the chat. We'll be following along as the webinar goes on, and then we'll allow some of those questions to be answered at the end as well. Also take a moment in the chat to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from and what organization you may be representing, or if you are a volunteer. And then this webinar is being recorded. So if you did RSVP for this event, you will receive a link with the recording and a follow-up email following. And again, thank you all for joining us for this event. All right, so some brief introductions here. I'm Brandon Praileau. I am the Virginia Program Director for Sun, and we're joined this afternoon by Mr. Tom Beach from Crossborder Energy. He is an expert for Appalachian Voices and Southern Environmental Law Center, who are also intervening in this APCo rate case. And then we're also joined by Karl Rábago from Rábago Energy. He is our expert witness for the intervening group of Solar United Neighbors, Sierra Club, Boat Solar, and Clean Virginia. And then we're joined by Liz Veazey, who is our director for our state policy campaigns. And so you'll hear from each of us at some point throughout this webinar. All right, so just want to talk a little bit about Sun's theory of change and kind of how our work revolves around some of our policy initiatives. So we judge our impact here at Sun by our theory of change, which is three-pronged. We, one, help people go solar. We, two, join people together, and then we fight for energy rights. So in Go Solar, we help folks go solar by helping them make the most informed decision possible for them to go solar, understanding that solar is a big ticket item. I generally like to say that we help folks with the what and the how more than we do the why. And we measure our impact by the amount of people that we can assist. And we do that through various ways, through our bulk purchasing campaigns, as well as through our national help desk, where we assist existing solar owners and prospective solar owners as they go on their solar journey. And then we join folks together. What we have found is that when someone goes solar, they generally want to connect with other solar owners and share their experiences. This aspect of our theory of change allows people to volunteer for social events and do solar advocacy. Solar is a very big tent. They're all sides of the political spectrum. It's a very diverse group of people who are advocating for solar and for energy independence. So through this part of our theory of change, we're able to engage people in grassroots activism by bringing them together to advocate for solar in a much grander way. And then lastly, which this webinar is focusing mostly on, is our aspect of our theory of change, where we fight for energy rights. And our approach here is very practical. We focus on practical, pragmatic legislation and policy that affects a person's ability to put solar on their home, their business, their school, or their church. We work in all levels of policy here at Sun. We work both in the local, state, and federal level. We're currently engaged in a huge national IRA defense strategy and outreach effort. But we've also been involved in state and local policy as well, passing HOA legislation in 2020, as well as working on permitting on the local level in Prince William County. Our belief in our fighting for energy rights is to help address practical barriers to solar deployment and solar policy. And that's why we're here today, is to address those barriers to solar policy as it relates to net metering. All right, next slide for me. And just a quick summary of net metering, and I'm not going to beat a dead horse here because I know that most of the folks that are on this call are policy experts and gurus and wonks. But net metering is a policy that allows people people with solar to get credit on their electric bills for the energy they produce. Virginia Code 5694 establishes these rules for net metering. Some of the highlights here for net metering here is that it is a full one-to-one credit for the energy that is produced, which will result in daily or seasonal surpluses, which is what allows us to net that energy and bank it or roll it over to our next statement cycle. And this is an annual billing cycle, which is based on your interconnection or your permission to operate date. And so these are just some simple basic things about net metering, just to lay the groundwork for how we're going to address the threat to net metering in ways that we can take action to preserve the full retail value of net metering. That's all I've got for you. And I'm going to toss it over to Liz, who's going to take us through a little bit about APCo's proposal, and then we'll hear from our two expert witnesses.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, I think most folks here are familiar with APCo, or Appalachian Power Company. But here's an image of the territory. As a refresher, APCo serves a little over 500,000 customers in Southwest Virginia. They are owned by AEP, another larger company that owns multiple utilities. And then here's a stat that I worked out, that average residential bills for 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity have gone up about almost 50% in the last 4 years. So just going to highlight that for a little bit of context. And then more specifically about this proposal that we're talking about, this is coming out of the VCEA, or the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And I think a number of the folks who are here were involved in passing that back in 2020. And one piece of that required Dominion and APCo to file a petition to update their net metering program. So APCo's was filed in late August of last year, and then Dominion's proposal is due in May of this year. And then, we've outlined some of the things in the law that the SEC, or the State Corporation Commission, is going to consider, rates and economic impact and fair cost. So there was some thought about the importance of these dockets, or these proceedings, and making sure that legislation included some of these pieces about thinking about economic impact and fair costs. And yeah, so APCo's proposal calls for some really big changes. We'll get into that in a minute. There are less than 1% of their customer base has solar and is net metered. So flagging that, and I think some of our experts will dig into that a little more. And yeah, generally we think that APCo doesn't provide a thorough analysis that really justifies the changes it is proposing. We'll go into that in a second. And then I was going to flag some of the key upcoming dates. APCo is filing testimony, their final rebuttal testimony, I think, on April 29th. And then May 13th is the deadline to submit written comments or sign up for the hearing, which will then be on May 20th. And so brief overview of APCo's proposal is that it's going from full net metering credit of around 16 cents per kilowatt hour to a little bit less than 5, so 4.92 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's almost a 70% reduction. APCo is proposing only lifting the 6% cap on net metering if this is approved. If their proposal is approved, they're basically ending any netting, right? So you can self-consume energy. There's no impact to the self-consumption of energy, but then if you have any energy you send back to the grid, that will all be at the export credit rate of 4.92. And then if you use energy, that will all be closer to the retail residential rate that's around 16 cents. And then I think they're proposing a new monthly fixed fee. I think it's the same as before, but they're setting it up to potentially, I think, have changes to that in the future. So just going to briefly outline the intervenors. So Brandon mentioned that SUN, our Solar United Neighbors, has partnered with the Sierra Club and Clean Virginia and Vote Solar. And that's how we were able to have a strong intervention, by sort of pooling our resources and collaborating. And that's been really great. And Karl is our expert. And we also have EQ Research as another expert for us. Appalachian Voices is intervening separately, represented by Southern Environmental Law Center. There's a Clean Energy Solutions Coalition of SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, AEU, or Advanced Energy United, and CHESA, or the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. So that's sort of a solar industry group. We also have the Distributed Solar Alliance. That's a group of some smaller to medium-sized installers combined with schools, churches, and local governments. And also the Coalition for Community Solar Access, or CCSA. I think we have somebody from CCSA here. I think I saw Charlie here. But anyways, there's a lot of strong interveners that are helping to push back on the APCo proposal. So it's great to see so many friends in the docket as well. And then I was just going to briefly touch on this, and I think Karl will go into this a little bit more, but we were excited to see that the SEC staff, which was required to file their testimony by April 8th, so they filed noting deficiencies in APCo's proposal and basically said we should maintain the current system. We shouldn't change anything until APCo comes back with a better proposal. They noted multiple deficiencies. So we were excited to see that as well. And I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karl. Let me switch out the slides for you, Karl.
Okay, great. Yeah, and they're not that important at the very start, folks. I'm just going to go over some high-level things about the case and the way it's happening. The first thing to know about this case is how important it is as precedent for Virginia. And given the heavy work that the Virginia State Corporation Commission is doing here, thank you to them for taking it on and taking it seriously. But I think it will have precedential value in many other parts of the country. So that's really big. The second really big thing is that no good deed goes unpunished, and there will be a Dominion proceeding just like this for Virginia Electric Power. So what happens here is also setting the tone for the other big IOU, investor-owned utility in Virginia. Finally, this case is linking heavily to the community solar or shared solar proceeding. APCo has just or fairly recently filed a very short-term case on an interim minimum bill, meaning when you become a community or shared solar subscriber, you will have to pay a minimum amount of money every month, and APCo is relying on its submissions in this proceeding in that one. And, short story there is their minimum bill is so high, nobody will ever become a shared solar customer. So we're really at a key point here in these issues. Second, this case has the benefit that very few cases of the rest of the country have ever had, which is that the commission took the time to write a very detailed order with a lot of prescriptions to the company about what they wanted to see in the case filing. And I included a roadmap in my testimony that allows you to see all those items broken out. And there's 2 slides of this. It's an eye chart kind of thing. But I kind of just wanted to put together, not kind of, I wanted to put together a simple score sheet, if you will. And without having to read all the fine detail, you'll see that in my assessment, even in the places where they kinda submitted something in response to the commission's direction, they generally failed to do what the commission asked. So, and the 2 slides that we have and that we'll share with you is just that extract of that table, but you can look at that in my testimony as well. Notwithstanding the fact that what the commission set out was a very detailed and specific guidance for what they wanted, APCo, of course, like I said, just kind of blew them off or phoned it in or whatever metaphor you want to use. But also, it's important to know that what the commission asked them to do wasn't all that hard. And I want to just tee up for your expectation what Tom is going to walk you through. The commission basically asked for a good benefit cost analysis, the kind of best practices analysis that every utility should do before they commit to spending your money or customers' money on various initiatives. And all they really did was try to leave all parts of that analysis laid out specifically so that APCo wouldn't try to dodge the ball. So there's lots of stuff out there. A lot of my testimony goes into the fact that we now have a national standard practice manual called the NSPM for benefit cost analysis. And APCo could have picked that up and followed it and done a really good job, but they didn't want to. A couple of other key substantive points. First, the case does include something we've seen a fair few times around the country and in the region, a fake concern for equity. APCo takes the approach that, there's most of our rooftop solar customers are rich. And because we think this creates there it is, cost shift, it's unfair to poor people. They have not lifted a finger to try to make solar more accessible to anyone, much less people with lower wealth or incomes. But they raised it because, like I said, it's become all too popular in the utility industry these days to try to drive a wedge between customers by raising an equity concern that they've suddenly discovered. Never mind, there are many more ways they could improve equity in rates and service than just killing rooftop solar. They do a lot of cherry picking of data points where they, rather than looking at a comprehensive data set, they chose their best short-term number in order to make it look like solar is real expensive. They completely ignored benefits at the distribution level, the places where local solar works. In fact, they set up a conceit that they would try to say that the only way to look at this, without ever actually saying this or admitting it, but their position is the only way to look at this is as an alternative to the utility scale solar plants that we have to build or contract with in order to comply with the Virginia Clean Economy Act. In that sense, unfortunately, not uncommon behavior for them and for Dominion to weaponize the VCEA and say, look, we're just trying to do this horrible thing as cheaply as we can, but don't raise the cost by making us do things like, let customers get rooftop solar. They use a lost revenues approach. Everything they don't get is a cost to them. And so basically, if you sum all that up, where they don't try, they cherry pick, they bring out the old tropes, APCo really just showed their cards and made it clear that they don't want their customers investing in solar. They don't consider it a resource at the distribution customer owned level. And therefore, they're not even going to try. And the numbers bear that all out. In addition to what Tom is going to talk about, you should know that the EQ testimony is also fantastic. It's a walk through the various components and the way that APCo did its calculations, and it exposed many, many other problems. So we hope we've laid it up for the commission here that they weren't being taken seriously, and hopefully they will end up resolving this case in a way that requires them to be taken seriously. We'll learn more when we get the rebuttal testimony to see if APCo has any humility or if they double down on what they're doing. I'm going to stop there, but Liz is going to bring us back to some discussion about the staff witness testimony. And I might make a few comments then if we still got time. So with that, I should say also, Liz is posting in the chat links to my testimony, to the NSPM. So she's helping us out here so that you don't have to just go look up everything I said. So turn it over to Tom.
Carl, before we move on, there is one
Yes,
question
sir.
in the chat that I think we want to address. When is their rebuttal testimony due?
I think the 29th. Yes, there we go. The end of this month, just a few more days.
All right, Liz.
Yeah, and I guess Karl may have already said this, but if you look at his table, and there's a lot of text there, but the main point is that, that Karl's analysis basically said that none of the things, that the SEC required APCo to do all of these things, and that they didn't really do any of them is basically the sort of, just to be clear about the point of that table. And for some of the things, Karl's like, well, they did include this, but I don't really think it complies with the order. So just wanted to try to sum that up and be clear about that.
This is a report card they should be embarrassed to show their parents.
That's right. Thanks, Karl. Okay, well, I think we can turn it over to Tom. I can pull up your slides. Just give me a second.
All right, thanks, Liz. My name is Tom Beach. I'm the principal at Crossborder Energy, and I appreciate the opportunity I had in this case to work on behalf of Appalachian Voices and to present what APCo should have done in this proceeding, which is to present a comprehensive benefit cost analysis of net metering in their service territory. Why don't we go to the next slide? Yeah, these are the conclusions and recommendations of my testimony. The analysis that I did shows that there is no reason to change net metering for APCo at this time. The penetration of net metered customers is I'm not even sure it's not quite to 1% yet. Well below the 6% cap on net metering. And it's, we've done work on net metering in probably 30 different states. And generally, with penetration this low, there's no need to make changes to net metering. Generally, the states that have started to change one-for-one net metering They've done so when the penetration has been, above 5%, and APCo's a long way from there. So why don't we go to the next slide, and I'll talk about the numbers that from our analysis, and that'll I'll walk through our other conclusions and recommendations that follow from the numbers. So a full-scale benefit cost analysis is not just a single benefit cost test. We actually did 5 different tests. And the reason that we did 5 tests is because one of the best practices for benefit cost analysis is to look at multiple perspectives. There isn't a single perspective that constitutes the public interest here. We need to look at, so we have tests here. The participant test looks at the perspective of solar customers themselves. It has to be a reasonable investment for solar customers, or they're not going to do it. The RIM test, the ratepayer impact measure test, looks at the perspective of non-participating ratepayers. It's the test that is looked at to see if there is a, quote, cost shift, unquote. The program administrator cost test looks at the perspective of overall, do utility bills go up or down? Then the total resource cost test, the TRC, looks at the kind of a system-wide perspective, or a kind of a resource planning perspective. Is rooftop solar a cost-effective resource for the utility system as a whole? And then the societal test is a variation of the TRC that, in addition to direct benefits that impact utility rates, also looks at quantifiable societal benefits like reduction in carbon pollution, reduction in criteria, air pollution, health benefits, local economic benefits, et cetera. And so this table shows which categories of costs or benefits are used in each test. And you can see that, for example, in the participant test, the revenues that the utility loses from customers serving their own loads with their own solar is that's a benefit, obviously, to participants, but it's a cost to other ratepayers in the RIM test. So when we assembled these numbers, first of all, we took a long-term perspective because solar is a long-lived resource. Your solar panels will work for 25 years. So these numbers are all 25-year levelized numbers. We took a comprehensive look at all of the benefits of rooftop solar, and that includes things like avoided distribution costs and avoided RPS costs that APCo did not include in their analysis. We also looked at the benefits of reducing ratepayer exposure to natural gas price volatility. APCo did not look at that, even though they have recognized that solar provides that benefit in the context of their large-scale solar installations. And if you look at the results here, you can see that the results for the kind of the 3 key tests, I'd say, are the participant test, the RIM test, and the TRC. And you can see that the results are all very close to 1. The benefits are approximately equal to the cost. And that's really what you want to see in your net metering program. You want the benefits for participants to be high enough so that people are encouraged to put solar on their house. The 1.06 benefit cost ratio for participants is not an outstanding investment, which is why the penetration is still relatively low in APCo's service territory, but it's also not terrible. The RIM score came out very close to 1.0, 0.98. I suppose you could say that because it came out 2% below 1.0, that there's a very small cost shift. We calculated how much that 2% would be, and it's $160,000 a year, which is, I'm sure, is less than what is being spent by the parties in this proceeding. In terms of the impact on other non-participating APCo ratepayers, it's about 3 cents a month on the customer bill. So that's really a de minimis impact. Then the TRC score is also around 1. That shows that rooftop solar is a cost-effective resource in APCo's service territory. And then when you add societal benefits, reductions in carbon, health benefits from reductions in criteria air pollution, and local economic benefits, the benefit cost ratio goes up significantly when you include those societal benefits. So that's where our numbers came out. I also want to say a few things, maybe go back one slide to our recommendations. No, yeah, back, there you go. We also took a look at, APCo did a cost of service analysis, which was requested by the commission, and their cost of service analysis had some really glaring errors in it. They had some major conceptual errors. There were certain costs where APCo assumed that a solar customer should be responsible for paying the same level of costs that it was paying before it put solar on before the customer put solar on their house. Obviously, when you put solar on your house, you start self-providing a significant part of your electricity usage. At least typically 50% of the solar output stays in your house and serves your home's load. So, you typically go from being a somewhat larger than average customer to being a somewhat smaller than average customer. Well, APCo's cost of service analysis assumed that for certain major cost categories like transmission costs, that solar customers should continue to pay the same amount of money that they paid the utility before they went solar. And that's like saying when your kids leave the house and go to college and your electric use goes way down because you're an empty nester, that somehow you should continue to pay the utility the same amount of money that you paid them when the kids were at home. And that's just, it's ridiculous. The other thing major mistake that they made is that a lot of their cost of service analysis is based on the solar customer's net usage. Well, that's basically what they import from the utility minus what they export. And that number, can be very low. But really, that's not what the cost of the service that APCo provides to the customer is. The only service that APCo provides is when you import power from the utility, when your meter runs forward. When your meter runs backwards, when you're exporting excess solar to the utility, APCo's not providing a service to you, you're providing a service to the utility. You're providing generation to the utility. So their cost of service analysis is very confused in who is providing service to whom. The way I expressed it in my testimony, if they make a lot of the fact that some solar customers will have very close to a zero bill every month, and that somehow this means they're not paying for the utility service. Well, if I offer to walk your dog when you're on vacation, and in exchange you do some detailing work on my car, and the detailing work on my car is worth $100, and the dog sitting is worth $100, then we each have provided a service to each other that's worth the same amount of money, and we can just shake hands and say, we're good. No money needs to change hands. I paid for the detailing you did for my car, and you paid for the dog sitting that I did, and we've paid fully for the services that we've provided to each other. That's not the way APCo looks at it. They look at the fact that no money changes hands, and all of a sudden they think you shorted them for the work they did for you. When we correct their cost of service analysis, it turns out that solar customers are actually slightly less expensive to serve than non-solar customers. And that's the way the numbers came out in our view. So happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it back to Liz.
Thanks, Tom. Did you want to touch on your last slide?
Well, this is just a visual representation of the chart that I went over. So I think I've gone through all these. I've kind of discussed these numbers already.
Cool. Okay, I think we can open up for questions soon. Or Brandon, do you want to talk briefly about how folks can get involved, and just to sort of get that out there, and then we can take questions?
Liz, let me just jump in real quick with like a 30-second summary of the staff testimony.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, because it oftentimes the Virginia SCC staff has been kind of subdued, but they really came out with guns blazing on this one. There are 4 pieces of testimony. It's extensive. A witness named Rafferty goes through how the basic solar PV watts modeling was deeply flawed by APCo. A witness named Smith talks about how they really didn't how APCo didn't really evaluate the economic development and other impacts fairly. Witness Unger does an overview, but the one really, if you really want to see the knockdown, the blow by blow, Blevins does a really good job going through all the ways. It was very reminiscent of my report card approach. It's like they were supposed to do this, they didn't. They were supposed to do this, they didn't. So we have staff in the wonderful position of saying, not only is it flawed, but they didn't even give us enough to make a decision on. I will tell you one other point that I raised in my testimony. There's some very clear language in the Virginia code that APCo sidestepped in order to come up with its net billing proposal. This 1 hour net billing that really reduces the value of a solar installation. I don't think it squares with the code as it stands. And changing the netting interval is something that's specifically not allowed in the code, or at least it doesn't say anything. It just says exactly what the netting should be. There may be some quibbling among the lawyers on this ultimately, and I wish staff had dove into it, but maybe they'll save it for briefs. But otherwise, the staff testimony is really impressive, and they have APCo has a long way to go to even just get into the room. Remember, last point is, remember that in utility proceedings like this, the utility has the burden of both the production of evidence, and then once that evidence is in, the proof of the things they want done. So we talk about a dual burden of production and proof. And what staff has said and what we've said is they failed on the production, and not surprisingly, therefore, they failed on the proof.
Karl,
I'll stop there.
Karl, we've got a follow-up question, and before we get to that, and that question is, how do demand charges impact solar PV economics?
Yeah, and Tom may have something to say about this. It depends. So we do have some places where utilities are trying to put demand charges on residential customers. Liz and I are in a case in El Paso right now where they're trying to impose a mandatory demand charge. It depends on how the demand charge is structured. If you're charged for being on the utility system peak, solar can sometimes help in the summer because it reduces your load. That's where some of the savings in cost to serve come from. You're just less demanding when the system is hot and needs to run a lot in the summertime. If they say any time that the customer demand comes up, then it can, and if the customer doesn't have a way of really controlling their peak load like a sophisticated business would be, often a demand charge can just look like another fixed charge, an unavoidable charge that you're going to get hit with. And so and by the way, when solar customers do a good thing and kind of move their demand to a different hour, they end up sort of getting punished with a demand charge if it's not structured correctly. So biggest answer, it depends, but I haven't seen a utility proposal for a demand charge that actually would work with solar customers to do a good deal for everybody. Tom, you want to add in onto that?
No, that was I don't have much to add to that. That was a good summary. Generally, demand charges are very difficult for solar customers to reduce, especially, as Karl said, the ones that apply 24 hours a day. And they're, almost no, I think there's only one or two large utilities in the US that have demand charges for residential customers. And even then, they're usually an option. There'll be an optional rate for residential with demand charges because they're very difficult for customers to understand and also very difficult for them to manage. Customers do not know what their instantaneous draw of power is, and they also have very little ability or desire to try to manage that.
Not many utilities provide them with the tools to even know what that usage is.
Right.
So,
right. A far better approach is to start out with time of use rates, where it's well defined. There's a peak period from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., something like that, on hot summer days, or in the mornings on cold days in the winter, and start out with time of use rates that people can understand and can act on. That's a much better way to proceed.
Yeah, those are great points. I see that Victoria, did you raise your hand? Did you have a question?
I do have a question. Is this the appropriate time?
Sure.
Liz, if I can just jump through these next two slides, because I think that Lindsay's question from baseline kind of speaks to these next two slides, and then I think we'll take the rest of the time and open it up for Q&A.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks for.
And I'm going to circle right back to you, Vic. Most of you who are on this call have either already taken action, or your organizations have created pages for folks to take action, or have sent out blasts for folks to take action, and we're grateful for that. Here are some steps and ways that you can take action. We link here the SEC comment form, and thank you, Liz, for dropping that in the chat. The deadline to sign up for written or telephonic comments is May the 13th. And so we're encouraging everyone, submit your own comments, but don't just submit your own comments. Also encourage others to kind of submit comments as well, whether they be friends, neighbors, solar owners, or other other advocates. And feel free to use some suggested talking points. Liz, if you go to the next slide, we share. I'm not going to insult intelligence today. I do want to leave some time for some questions, but we do have some comment starters here, or some some suggested talking points that kind of speak to some of the testimony, and also talk about some of the benefits of solar and what some of the changes to in APCo's proposal would do to freedom of choice, energy savings, low growth and resiliency, and jobs and economic development. And Karl kind of talked a little bit about the cost shift narrative, and we do have some additional resources on our website that kind of speak to combating the cost shift narrative. So let's open it up for some Q&A. And Vic, we'll start with you first, and then we've got another question in the chat.
Hey, thank you so much. This is super helpful. So I think a while back you said that APCo in their initial comments had requested some sort of condition on the carve-out, that the carve-out couldn't be raised unless the compensatory structure was raised in some way. Is that correct? Then I have a follow-up question.
Liz, if you don't.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't know if Tom or Karl wants to speak to that at all, but that's my understanding that APCo says, we're willing to change the cap, but only if you adopt our proposal, basically. But I don't know if anybody else wants to add on.
That's my recollection of what their testimony says.
Yeah,
Okay.
their position was actually kind of clever. And we tried asking several questions to get around it. They said, if you do what we want, which is essentially just give you wholesale market credit for your rooftop solar, the least possible as required by federal law and therefore state law, then the cap doesn't matter, because
Sure.
basically it's just the market's never going to grow and nobody's ever going to do it, and they'll be perfectly happy. They
Right.
didn't quite, and then they said, but if you do continue to compensate exports, and by the way, they only paid attention to exports. They never looked at the value like Tom did of offsetting your energy use. They never considered that as a value. But they said if you continue to compensate exports at retail, then you have to have the cap, and you should consider lowering it, because we care about those people who are receiving the bad end of the cost shift. So it's very, very clever. Whether the commission could change the cap is something, yes, they can consider it based on these net metering proceedings. Another very consequential potential outcome from this and the Dominion proceedings.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I was getting to. Is it within the commission's jurisdiction to lower the cap as part of this proceeding?
Yeah, I think they can do that, or address the compensation side, you
Okay.
know.
And could they raise the cap as well through this
I
proceeding?
think they could. I mean, from my view, it looks like if they consider it to be cost effective, they don't have to have it
Okay.
being capped. But we're not going to get a proposal from the utility to do that. By the way, the latest research I've been able to find is that costs don't get serious until market penetration reaches somewhere in the 20% range. The important thing about this is, there's like, does rooftop solar cause trouble for the grid? Is that it appears not to, until you get a lot of solar, 10, 20 times more than APCo has. And second of all, the number is getting bigger all the time, because the inverters are getting smarter. The utilities are spending a fortune on the distribution grid, so it's getting smarter and healthier, and it can handle more and more of this distributed variable generation. And a fair few people are putting in batteries. It makes it even better. So we took various approaches. We all said, well, if you have to do anything, just keep net metering in place and start looking at it at 5%, or when it gets to 6%. It's not necessary to stop it. I will tell you that fixed numbers are really a problem, because the market behaves really weird when it gets to a cliff. And it's just not good for sustained, orderly development of the rooftop solar market.
Yeah,
Brandon,
thank
do you have
And
another question? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, yeah, I just found in the VCA where I just had forgotten that was in there.
We do have another question in the chat. Are there any studies on cost only at 20%?
I found, trying to remember because I put it in something else yesterday. I found something. While we were talking, I'll try to see if I can find it real quick.
And then Brandon, somebody had a question about the staff and the commissioners? Daniel had that question.
Yeah, as he said, staff testimony is impressively strong, and it's nice to not have to fight them in this case. Can we speak to what we know about the current commissioners who are all relatively new, their relationship with staff, and how this may or may not impact the final order in this proceeding?
Yeah, I don't know who here is most familiar with the SEC.
Yeah. Anybody want to take a stab at that, either Tom or?
No, I'm not familiar with the Virginia Commission, so it's not. I'm not a political consultant.
Yeah, that is a great detailed question, but I'm not sure that yeah, we have anybody here who, I mean. Okay, I don't see anybody raising their
There
hand,
is
but
Aaron just dropped in the chat some info on the commissioners for you, Daniel. I think that there are several people on the call here today who probably have some experience with the commission, and but this is a completely new commission, as well as a full commission, first in Virginia in a while. So I think that will definitely have an impact. Though staff testimony is not binding, I think this is a great position to be in going into the hearing, to have such strong staff testimony. I don't know if the relationship between staff and the commissioners will play out, but I do think will play out to any advantage or disadvantage. But I do think the strong staff testimony would probably play out a little better going into the commission here.
all right, Brandon, did you have other questions?
I did not. Are there any other questions from anyone on today for our experts while they're here? Or any questions regarding commission hearing process? Yes, Vic.
Sorry, one more question. Is there a sensitivity in terms of the for the participant in the program to federal tax credits, and do we expect that to change at all? There's a slight net benefit right now.
So, I mean, obviously the 30% federal tax credit is a significant benefit to participating solar customers. Yes.
Yeah, I started my process with the switch team here in Colorado to get my solar, and the installers that I talked to and the folks there are all of the opinion that it feels pretty good for this year, but they might mess with it the next year. Note that while it is a benefit to the customer, unless you're really looking at like the participant costs, if you're just looking at the utility cost, which is, or the sort of the broader cost, it doesn't affect the utility cost, right? So the utility benefit cost assessment all by itself is not impacted by how much you or I get a discount or a deal from anybody or a tax credit. One important point is that, of course, that it's federal dollars. If net metering is killed or stifled or choked down, those are federal tax dollars that the state is not bringing back, right? And a key point of economic development analysis and just, politics and policy is we want to make sure we get our fair share or more of the federal tax money. It shouldn't all go to, I don't know, Louisiana or something, right? Some of it should come to us in Virginia as well. And utilities often say we don't care about that because it's outside of our utility costs and our cost of service regulation, but political people really like to be able to take advantage of federal tax credits. And in that regard, it's worth mentioning and worth being worried about if the feds try to tinker with those provisions. Like I say, not so much this year and therefore in next tax year, but the year after, the year after.
I think we've got time for one more question that's in the chat from Oliver Lamb. Is there an opportunity to submit a counter proposal to the SEC?
Well, I think that our proposal is just to keep the status quo. I think that's been, that's been the common theme. That should be considered just as much a proposal as what the utility has put forward. And net metering is well established. It's something people understand, and they certainly have not presented a compelling case to make any changes.
And I'm going to post the link for that 20% study as soon as I can get this thing up here in the chat in front of me. It's a NREL paper. It is a study of some actual feeders that was done by them. But Horowitz leads a team or is part of a team that does a lot of this penetration cost. I want to make one other additional point about this, and I'll share with you another quick link, which is that remember to keep this all in perspective. There's a lot of the utility talking about how this has an impact and has a cost shift. This is small potatoes in the overall menu of how utilities are raising rates and what they're raising, what's causing them to raise rates, which is a lot of higher profits, a lot of gold, what we call gold plating of the system. So this old piece from 2017 that I published shows we're really focusing on the little stuff. Not surprising because utilities consider rooftop solar competition, but it's not, this would not pass the Willie Sutton test for stealing our money.
Karl just sent those to me. I had just messaged him earlier, so that's my fault. But I just sent them all to everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
We want to thank everyone again for joining us. We are right at about time. And we want to thank especially Tom and Karl for taking the time today to come and walk us through APCo's proposal, as well as give us a very in-depth view of what some of the proposal means, as well as some of the testimony that was also submitted.